The blood-red sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Austin, Texas, as Theodora Zimmerman staggered down from the stagecoach, her knuckles white around the handle of her battered valise. It was 1876, 3 weeks since she'd buried her father, and the journey west had stripped away what little composure she had left. Whispers followed her like a cloud of flies as she made her way toward the general store, her city clothes marking her as an outsider as clearly as if she'd worn a sign around her neck. "Another one who won't last the month," muttered a woman sweeping her porch. "Poor thing doesn't know what she's in for," replied her companion, not bothering to lower her voice. Theodora straightened her spine and kept walking. Let them talk. They didn't know the steel that had formed inside her during those long nights nursing her dying father, or during the grueling days settling his debts, which had left her with nothing but a deed to a ramshackle homestead 10 miles outside of Austin and the clothes on her back. The interior of the general store offered blessed relief from the relentless Texas heat. A bell tinkled overhead as she entered, drawing the attention of the proprietor, a portly man with spectacles perched on his bulbous nose. "What can I help you with, miss?" he asked, eyeing her travel-worn appearance with barely concealed skepticism. "I need supplies," Theodora said, setting her valise down. "I'm moving into the old Zimmerman place outside of town." The shopkeeper's eyebrows shot up. "The Zimmerman place, that's been abandoned for years, miss. Not fit for a woman alone." "It's mine now," she replied firmly, placing her father's deed on the counter. "My father was Joseph Zimmerman. I've come to claim what's left of his property." The man studied the document, then her face, recognition dawning in his eyes. "You're Joe's girl from back east. The one he used to write about," Theodora nodded, her throat suddenly tight. "Yes, sir, and I'll need seed, tools, and enough provisions to get me through until I can make the land productive." A bark of laughter came from a corner of the store. Theodora turned to see an older man in dusty overalls shaking his head. "Productive? That land ain't been productive since Joe left it. Rocky soil, irregular water. It near killed your daddy, and he was a strong man." "I'm stronger than I look," Theodora replied, lifting her chin. "You ain't gonna last 2 weeks," another voice chimed in, belonging to a man leaning against the door frame. "That land needs a man's touch, or better yet, should be sold to someone who knows what they're doing." Theodora faced him, meeting his gaze steadily. "Are you making an offer, sir?" "Might be, for the right price." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then you'll be disappointed. I didn't come all this way to sell." She turned back to the shopkeeper. "Now, about those supplies." The bell over the door rang again, and the atmosphere in the store shifted. Theodora sensed the change before she saw its cause: a tall man ducking through the doorway, removing his wide-brimmed hat as he entered. Dust clung to his clothes, and a leather holster hung low on his hip. His eyes, startlingly blue against his sun-weathered skin, swept over the scene before landing on her. "Problem here, Morris?" he asked the shopkeeper, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable authority. "No problem, Sheriff," the man who'd been eyeing her land answered before Morris could speak. "Just offering some friendly advice to the newcomer." The newcomer, who she now realized was the local lawman, gave a non-committal grunt and moved to the counter. "Need some tobacco, Morris, when you're done helping the lady?" Morris nodded eagerly. "Of course, Sheriff Farwell. Just a moment." Sheriff Farwell. The name tickled something in Theodora's memory. Hadn't her father mentioned a Farwell in one of his infrequent letters? "Miss Zimmerman needs supplies for the old homestead," Morris explained to the sheriff. "She's Joe's daughter, come to work the place." The sheriff's eyes narrowed as he studied her with new interest. "Joe Zimmerman's girl from Philadelphia?" "Yes," she answered, surprised. "Did you know my father, Luke Farwell?" he said, extending a calloused hand. "Your father and I had business together years back. Sorry to hear of his passing." His grip was firm but not crushing, a courtesy some men didn't extend to women. Theodora appreciated it, along with the lack of pity or condescension in his tone. "Thank you, Sheriff," she said. It seems you're the first person who hasn't immediately told me I'm a fool for trying to work my father's land. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Didn't say you weren't a fool. Just said I was sorry about your father. Despite herself, Theodora felt a laugh bubble up in her throat. After weeks of tears and worry, the unexpected humor was like cool water on parched ground. Fair enough, Sheriff, but I'm staying all the same, he nodded, retrieving his package from Morris. Your choice, Miss Zimmerman, but that place isn't what it was in your father's day. You'd be smart to take Mr. Reynolds' offer. He tipped his head toward the man who'd been eyeing her land. With that, he replaced his hat and left, the bell announcing his departure with the same cheerful ring that had heralded his arrival. Theodora turned back to Morris, determined. I'll need a wagon, tools, seed, and enough food to last me a month while I get settled. And don't try to cheat me on the prices just because I'm new. Morris looked like he might protest but thought better of it. Yes, madam, but I can't arrange delivery until next week at the earliest. My boy's away in San Antonio. I don't need delivery. I'll drive the wagon myself. The men in the store exchanged glances that plainly said they thought she was mad. Miss, have you ever driven a wagon before? Morris asked carefully. No, Theodora admitted, but I expect I'll learn fast. 3 hours later, Theodora sat atop a loaded wagon at the edge of town, reins clutched in her trembling hands, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. The horses shifted impatiently, sensing her inexperience. Her purchases had depleted most of her remaining money, and she felt the weight of that decision pressing down on her like the merciless Texas sun. Planning to sit there until sunset, she started at the voice, nearly dropping the reins. Sheriff Farwell sat astride a handsome chestnut gelding beside the wagon, regarding her with something between amusement and concern. I'm gathering my thoughts, she said with as much dignity as she could muster. Gather them while you move. You've got a good 10 miles ahead and these roads get treacherous after dark. He nodded at the horses. Give them a gentle flick and keep the reins steady. Theodora did as instructed, and to her relief, the wagon lurched forward. The motion was jarring, but the horses seemed to know their business even if she didn't. There, the sheriff said, keeping pace beside her. Not so hard, is it? Are you escorting me, Sheriff? She asked, focusing on keeping the wagon straight. Just heading in the same direction, he said casually. My ranch borders your father's land to the north. Might as well see you safely there. Theodora wasn't sure whether to be grateful or offended. I can manage. Never said you couldn't. But these roads can be confusing, and there's been trouble with bandits along the creek road. She shot him a look. Bandits, you're trying to frighten me, the corner of his mouth twitched. Is it working? Despite everything, Theodora found herself smiling again. No. It would take more than the threat of bandits to turn me back now. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the creak of the wagon and the steady clip-clop of hooves the only sounds. The landscape opened up around them, vast and beautiful in a way that Theodora's Eastern upbringing hadn't prepared her for. Rolling hills dotted with scrub oak and mesquite gave way to wider vistas, the horizon seemingly endless under the vast Texas sky. Why are you really here, Miss Zimmerman? The sheriff asked after they'd covered several miles. Theodora considered deflecting but found herself answering honestly. There's nothing left for me in Philadelphia. My father's debts took everything except this land. It's all I have. He nodded, eyes on the road ahead. It's hard country. Harder for a woman alone. So I've been told, repeatedly. Her voice held an edge, not trying to discourage you, just stating facts. Facts can change. I may not know how to farm yet, but I'm not afraid of hard work. Sheriff Farwell studied her for a long moment. No, I don't expect you are. He gestured ahead. Your turn's coming up. That track to the right leads to your property. The track was little more than a suggestion of a road, overgrown and rutted. Theodora's heart sank as she steered the wagon onto it. The going immediately became rougher, the wagon bouncing alarmingly over the uneven ground. Slow and steady, the sheriff advised. Let the horses pick their way. After what felt like an eternity of jarring progress, the homestead finally came into view. Theodora's last hope that perhaps the townsfolk had exaggerated its condition died a swift death. The small cabin listed slightly to one side, its windows dark empty squares in the weathered wood. The barn looked even worse, its roof partially collapsed. The fields beyond were a tangle of weeds and scrub, with no sign of the productive farm her father had described in his letters. "Oh," she said softly, unable to mask her dismay. Sheriff Farwell had the grace not to say, "I told you so." Instead, he dismounted and helped her down from the wagon. "It needs work," he acknowledged. "But the well's good. Your father dug deep and the frame of the house is solid enough. Could be worse." Theodora stared at what was to be her new home, then straightened her shoulders. "Yes, it could be worse. I could have no home at all." The sheriff nodded, something like approval in his eyes. "I'll help you unload, then you should secure the horses for the night. There's a lean-to on the side of the barn that's still intact. We can put them there until you get the barn proper cleaned up." Theodora raised an eyebrow. "I thought you were just seeing me safely to my door, Sheriff." "Luke," he corrected. "And I'd be a poor neighbor if I left you to handle all this alone your first night. Besides, I promised your father I'd look out for his property. Didn't know that would include his daughter at the time." "You made a promise to my father?" "When?" The Sheriff Luke began unhitching the horses. "Few months back. He wrote me saying he was ailing, asked me to keep an eye on the place until he could return or send someone to claim it. Guess that someone is you." Theodora absorbed this information as she helped unload her supplies. By the time the wagon was empty and the horses settled, twilight was painting the land in shades of purple and gold. "You should stay in town tonight," Luke said, surveying the cabin dubiously. "That roof needs checking before you sleep under it." "No," Theodora said firmly. "This is my home now, I'll manage." He sighed, clearly expecting that answer. "Then at least let me make sure there aren't any unwelcome visitors inside." Wouldn't be the first time drifters or wild animals took shelter in an abandoned cabin. Theodora hadn't considered that possibility. "Very well. But then I really must insist you go, Sheriff. I may be new here, but I understand the proprieties." Luke's laugh was unexpected, a deep rumble that made something warm unfurl in her chest. "Proprieties? Miss Zimmerman, you're 10 miles from the nearest neighbor in the Texas Hill Country, but I take your point. I'll clear the cabin and be on my way." The interior of the cabin was dusty but, as Luke had said, structurally sound. A quick inspection revealed no dangerous wildlife or squatters, just a thick layer of dust and some evidence of mice. A stone fireplace dominated one wall and simple furnishings: a table, 2 chairs. A bed frame with a rotting mattress remained from her father's occupancy. "It's not much," Luke said, wiping dust from his hands, "but it could be made comfortable enough. Needs a woman's touch." Theodora bristled slightly. "Or just someone who cares enough to do the work. I don't think my gender has much to do with it." Luke held up his hands in surrender. "No offense meant." He moved to the door. "I'll be heading back now. My place is about 3 miles north if you need anything." "Follow the creek upstream, you can't miss it. Farwell Ranch, larger operation than this, but nothing fancy." "Thank you for your help, Sheriff." "Luke," he corrected again. "And you're welcome, Miss Zimmerman. Theodora," she offered, "or Thea as my father called me." A smile touched his lips. "Thea, then. I'll check on you in a few days, if that's acceptable." "I'm sure that won't be necessary," she said, though a part of her was relieved by the promise of seeing another human face before too long. He nodded, not arguing the point. "Good night, then. Bar the door after me." After he left, Theodora stood in the middle of the dusty cabin, truly alone for the first time since arriving in Texas. The silence was absolute in a way she'd never experienced in Philadelphia, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the scrub oak and the distant call of a night bird. "Well, Father," she said aloud to the empty room, "I'm here. Now what?" No answer came, of course, but she hadn't expected one. Instead, she unrolled her bedding on the floor. She'd burn that moldering mattress tomorrow, and despite her exhaustion, spent a long time staring into the darkness, wondering what madness had driven her to this place, and what strength would see her through. The morning dawned bright and merciless, sunlight streaming through the cracks in the cabin walls. Theodora awoke stiff and disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. Reality crashed back quickly enough as she surveyed her new home in the unforgiving light of day. It was worse than she'd thought. The floor was rotting in places, and what she'd taken for shadows the night before revealed themselves as water stains along one wall. The roof, at least, seemed intact over the main portion of the cabin, but she'd need to check it more thoroughly. One thing at a time, she told herself firmly, rising and splashing water on her face from a bucket she'd filled at the well the night before. She dressed quickly and went to tend the horses, who greeted her with soft nickers. At least they seemed healthy and calm, a blessing she hadn't expected. The lean-to needed repairs, but it would serve for now. After feeding and watering them, she set about exploring the property properly. The barn was in worse shape up close, the roof caved in on the north side and evidence of rot throughout. The fields beyond were overgrown, but she could still make out the furrows of previous planting. A small orchard of peach trees, gone wild with neglect, stood to the east. Beyond that, the land sloped down to a creek that burbled cheerfully, seemingly unaware of the desolation surrounding it. Theodora sat on a rock by the creek, overwhelmed by the task ahead. Her father had painted such a different picture in his letters: a thriving small farm with good water, fertile soil, and promising prospects. Had he been lying to make her feel better about his absence, or had the place truly fallen so far in such a short time? A rustling in the bushes nearby startled her. She grabbed a stick, ready to defend herself against whatever wildlife might emerge, but relaxed when she saw it was only a rabbit. It froze when it spotted her, then bounded away into the underbrush. At least there was game. That was something. With renewed determination, Theodora returned to the cabin and began the arduous task of making it habitable. She swept out years of dust and debris, dragged the rotting mattress outside to burn, and scrubbed the floors and walls until her hands were raw. By midday, she was exhausted and filthy, but the cabin's main room looked significantly better. She was struggling to repair a broken shutter when she heard the sound of approaching hooves. Her heart leapt to her throat. Bandits, before she remembered the sheriff's promise to check on her, but it had only been a day. It wasn't Luke Farwell who rode into her yard, however, but a woman perhaps 10 years her senior, seated confidently astride a dappled mare. She wore practical riding clothes and had her dark hair braided and pinned up under a wide-brimmed hat. Miss Zimmerman. The woman called, dismounting with practiced ease. "I'm Margaret Farwell, Luke's sister. He mentioned you'd settled in, and I thought you might appreciate some company and an extra pair of hands." Theodora climbed down from her perch by the window, brushing dust from her skirts. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Farwell." "Miss Farwell," the woman corrected with a smile. "Never married, and please call me Maggie, everyone does." She surveyed the cabin and Theodora's work with an appraising eye. "You've made good progress already. But there's plenty left to do, and 4 hands are better than 2. Without waiting for an invitation, Maggie removed her hat and gloves and set to work helping Theodora finish the shutter. Her capable assistance and easy conversation made the task go much faster. "Luke said you came all the way from Philadelphia," Maggie remarked as they moved on to patching a hole in the roof. "That's a long journey for a woman alone." "Necessity makes travelers of us all," Theodora replied, handing up a piece of wood. "My father's death left me with few options." Maggie nodded, hammering the patch into place. "I'm sorry for your loss. Joe was a good man, not much of a farmer, mind you, but a good man." Theodora paused. "You knew my father?" Everyone around these parts knew Joe Zimmerman. He was here for nearly 5 years before his health started failing and he went back east. He was quite the character, always full of big ideas and schemes. Some folks found him aggravating, but I thought he was a breath of fresh air. That sounds like my father, Theodora said softly. Always dreaming, planning the next big venture. My mother used to say he'd chase a rainbow right over the horizon if he thought there might be gold at the end of it. Accurate assessment, Maggie laughed. But he loved this place, talked about it all the time and about you. Kept saying he was going to bring you out here once he got the farm properly established. Theodora felt a pang of grief fresh as the day he died. He never stopped talking about coming back. Even when he was too ill to stand, he'd tell me stories about Texas sunsets and the taste of peaches from his orchard. Maggie's expression softened. Well, those peach trees are still there, though they need serious pruning. With some care, they might bear fruit again next season. They worked through the afternoon, Maggie proving to be not just good company but a font of practical knowledge about homesteading. By the time the sun began to set, they had made significant improvements to the cabin and had shared a simple meal Maggie had thoughtfully brought along. "You should come to dinner at our place tomorrow," Maggie said as she prepared to leave. "It's Sunday and we always have a big spread. Luke's a surprisingly good cook, though don't tell him I said so. His head's big enough already." Theodora hesitated. "That's very kind, but I have so much to do here." "The work will still be here Monday," Maggie countered, "and you need to eat properly if you're going to keep up this pace. Besides, it's good to know your neighbors out here. We look out for each other." There was a logic to that Theodora couldn't deny, and truth be told, the prospect of a proper meal and company was appealing. "Very well, thank you for the invitation." "Wonderful. Luke will come fetch you around noon if that suits. It's not far, but the trail can be tricky if you don't know it." After Maggie left, Theodora sat on the cabin's small porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in the vibrant colors her father had described. For the first time since arriving, she felt a small spark of hope that perhaps she could make this work after all. The following morning, Theodora rose early, determined to make herself as presentable as possible for the dinner invitation. She washed thoroughly in water from the creek, thankful for its clean, cool flow, and donned the least travel-worn of her dresses. Her hair, usually pinned severely back, she arranged in a softer style, allowing a few curls to frame her face. "This is ridiculous," she told her reflection in the small mirror she'd unpacked. "It's just a neighborly dinner." Yet she couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation she felt at the thought of seeing Luke Farwell again. There was something about the sheriff that intrigued her, his quiet competence, perhaps, or the way he'd helped without making her feel incompetent. True to Maggie's word, Luke arrived at noon, riding the same chestnut gelding. He traded his sheriff's badge for simpler attire, a clean shirt and well-worn jeans that spoke of a man more comfortable on a ranch than in town. "Miss Zimmerman," he greeted her, removing his hat. "You look." He paused, seeming to search for an appropriate compliment. "Rested. The place is looking better too." "Your sister is a marvel," Theodora replied, stepping out onto the porch. "I've learned more about homesteading in one afternoon with her than I would have in a month of fumbling on my own." "Maggie has that effect on people," Luke agreed with evident affection. "Ready to ride? I brought Daisy for you." He nodded toward a placid-looking bay mare tethered behind his gelding. The ride to Farwell Ranch took them along the creek and through stands of oak and mesquite. Luke pointed out landmarks and boundaries as they went, educating her about the land in his straightforward way. "Creek runs year-round, even in the dry months," he explained. "That's rare around here, and it's why both our properties are valuable." "Your father knew what he was doing when he bought that land, whatever else folks might say." "You seem to have a higher opinion of my father than most," Theodora observed. Luke shrugged. "Joe was a dreamer, sure, but he worked hard and he had vision. Just didn't have the know-how to match his ambition when it came to farming, or the patience." "And you think I do?" "Don't know you well enough to say," he replied honestly, "but you've stuck it out this far, which is more than most city folks would have done." They crested a small rise, and Farwell Ranch spread out before them. Unlike her father's struggling homestead, this was a well-established operation. A large cabin, almost a proper house, stood proudly on a gentle slope, with a substantial barn and several outbuildings nearby. Fenced pastures contained horses and cattle, and neat fields showed evidence of successful crops. "This is impressive," Theodora said, unable to hide her admiration. "How long have you been here, born here?" Luke replied. "My father staked this claim after the war, the first one with Mexico. Built it up over 30 years before he passed. Maggie and I have been running it together since then." "No wife to help you?" The question slipped out before Theodora could consider its propriety. If Luke was offended, he didn't show it. "Never found the time," he said simply, "or the right woman. Sheriff duties keep me busy, and what time I have left goes to the ranch." They were met at the house by Maggie, who greeted Theodora warmly and ushered her inside while Luke saw to the horses. The interior of the Farwell home was spacious and welcoming, with solid furnishings and touches of femininity that Theodora assumed were Maggie's influence. "Come help me finish dinner while Luke cleans up," Maggie suggested, leading the way to a kitchen that smelled heavenly. "He may be a good cook, but he's a mess in the process. I always make him wash up extra carefully before meals." Dinner was a revelatory experience. The food, roast beef, fresh vegetables from their garden, and hot biscuits, was delicious, but it was the conversation that Theodora found herself savoring. Luke and Maggie treated her not as a hopeless city girl, but as a neighbor and potential friend. They shared stories of the area, practical advice about farming and ranch life, and gentle good humor that made her laugh more than she had in months. "You'll need a milk cow," Luke said as they lingered over coffee and Maggie's peach cobbler. "I noticed you didn't have one on your supplies list." "I hadn't thought of it," Theodora admitted. "I was focused on the crops." "Crops are important," Maggie agreed, "but a good milk cow gives you a daily return on your investment. Milk, butter, cheese, all essentials, and you can sell the excess in town." "I don't know the first thing about milking a cow," Theodora confessed. "It's not difficult to learn," Luke assured her. "We have a heifer that's freshened recently her first calf. She'd be perfect for a beginner." Gentle temperament. Theodora set down her cup, surprised. "Are you offering me one of your cows?" "Not offering, selling," Luke clarified. "At a fair price with the option to pay after your first harvest. Consider it an investment in a neighbor's success." "I couldn't possibly." "You could and you should," Maggie interrupted. "It's how things work out here, Thea. Neighbors help neighbors, and someday you'll do the same for someone else. Besides, I'm getting tired of Luke complaining about having too many mouths to feed." The siblings exchanged a look that told Theodora this was a practiced routine, Luke making the practical offer, Maggie softening it to make acceptance easier. "Thank you," she said finally. "That's very generous, but I insist on drawing up a proper agreement." Luke nodded, seemingly pleased by her business sense. "Fair enough. I'll bring her over tomorrow along with some feed to get you started." After dinner, while Maggie cleared the dishes despite Theodora's offers to help, Luke suggested a walk to see more of the ranch. The evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "Your sister is remarkable," Theodora said as they strolled toward a rise overlooking the creek. "I can see why this place thrives with her care." "Maggie's the heart of Farwell Ranch," Luke agreed. "Always has been, even when our parents were alive. Has a way with animals, plants, people, everything that grows." "And what are you, the muscle?" Theodora teased, surprising herself with the ease she felt in his company. Luke's laugh was warm in the gathering dusk. "Sometimes. Mostly I handle the business end contracts, cattle sales, dealing with the bank, and keeping the peace in town, of course." "How did you become sheriff? It seems an unusual second career for a rancher." "Not so unusual around here. Town needed someone they could trust after the last sheriff turned out to be in league with cattle rustlers. I'd helped track down the gang, so the town council asked me to step in temporarily. 5 years later, here I am." "Do you enjoy it? Being sheriff, I mean." Luke considered the question seriously. Most days, I like that people trust me to be fair. Don't much care for the paperwork or dealing with drunks on Saturday nights, but it's important work." He glanced at her. "What about you? What did you do in Philadelphia?" "I was a teacher," Theodora said, feeling a pang for the life she'd left behind. "A girls' academy. I taught history and literature." "A teacher," he repeated thoughtfully. "Austin's school could use someone with proper education. Might be something to consider if farming doesn't suit you." The implied doubt stung more than it should have. "I'm committed to making my father's land productive. I didn't come all this way to abandon his dream." "No offense meant," Luke said quickly. "Just thinking practical. Many folks around here work multiple jobs. I'm sheriff and a rancher." "No reason you couldn't be a farmer and a teacher." Theodora softened, recognizing the logic in his words. "I suppose that's true. But for now, I need to focus on the homestead. There's so much to learn, so much to do." They had reached the top of the rise, and Luke fell silent, allowing her to take in the view. The setting sun gilded the landscape, turning the creek into a ribbon of fire and the distant hills to purple shadows. It was breathtaking in its vast, wild beauty. "My father used to describe Texas sunsets in his letters," Theodora said softly. "I thought he was exaggerating. He wasn't." "No," Luke agreed, his voice equally quiet. "Some things can't be exaggerated." They stood together in companionable silence as darkness crept over the land. And Theodora felt something shift inside her, a sense that perhaps this place could become home after all. The next morning, true to his word, Luke arrived at Theodora's homestead leading a pretty brown and white heifer with a calf at her side. "This is Buttercup," he said, handing Theodora the lead rope. "And her calf doesn't have a name yet. That'll be your job." Theodora accepted the rope warily, eyeing the cow with uncertainty. "She's larger than I expected." Luke's eyes crinkled with amusement. "She's actually small for a milk cow. Jersey breed, they don't give as much milk as some, but what they give is richer, better for butter and cheese." "And you're sure she's gentle?" "Gentlest cow I've ever met. Here, I'll show you how to milk her." He led Theodora and Buttercup to the lean-to, where he'd already deposited a bag of feed and a milking stool. First lesson in homesteading, how to get breakfast. What followed was both mortifying and enlightening. Luke positioned Theodora on the stool, showed her how to secure the cow, and then guided her hands through the motions of milking. His calloused fingers over hers made concentration difficult, but eventually she got the rhythm right. To her delight, streams of milk began hitting the pail with satisfying pings. "There you go," Luke said approvingly. "You're a natural." "Hardly," Theodora laughed, but she felt a ridiculous surge of pride at the accomplishment. "But I think I can manage with practice. Practice is all it takes." "That and patience." He stepped back, watching as she continued on her own. "Most things worth doing are like that." Over the next several weeks, Luke became a regular presence at the homestead. He never stayed long. Propriety was maintained, but his visits were frequent and purposeful. Each time he brought a new lesson: how to mend fences, repair the barn roof, prepare soil for planting, identify which wild plants were edible and which were not. Sometimes Maggie came with him, sometimes he came alone, but always he departed, leaving Theodora more capable than before. The townsfolk noticed. When Theodora ventured into Austin for supplies a month after her arrival, the reception was markedly different. Morris, the shopkeeper, greeted her with a respectful nod. "Miss Zimmerman, how's that homestead coming along?" "Slowly but surely, Mr. Morris," she replied, handing him her list. "Heard the sheriff's been helping you get settled," remarked a woman examining fabric nearby. "Mrs. Reynolds, wife of the man who'd wanted to buy her land. Sheriff Farwell and his sister have been very kind neighbors," Theodora acknowledged neutrally. Mrs. Reynolds exchanged knowing looks with another woman. "Just neighbors, is it? Seems the sheriff rides out your way mighty often for simple neighborliness." Theodora felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her composure. "Good neighbors are invaluable in this country, as I'm learning. Would you agree, Mrs. Reynolds?" The woman had the grace to look abashed. "Can't argue with that." though some might wonder why the sheriff's taken such a particular interest in your property. My father and the Farwells were friends, Theodora said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. Now, Mr. Morris, I'll need these items delivered this afternoon if possible. I have more work to do before sundown. As she left the store, Theodora heard whispers follow her, but they held a different tone, now speculation rather than dismissal. She wasn't sure which was worse. Luke was waiting by her wagon, his expression unreadable. Productive trip. Yes, thank you, she replied, wondering if he'd overheard the exchange in the store. Mr. Morris will deliver the heavier items later. Luke nodded, falling into step beside her as she headed toward the dressmaker's shop. Town's talking, he said bluntly. I noticed. Does it bother you? Theodora considered the question. I'd prefer to be judged on my own merits rather than on who my neighbors are, but I understand how small towns work. People need something to talk about. They're not just talking about neighbors, Luke said, his voice dropping lower. They're speculating about my intentions. Theodora stopped walking, turning to face him squarely. And what are your intentions, Sheriff Farwell? His eyes, so startlingly blue against his tanned face, held her steadily. I believe in helping neighbors, as I said. But I won't pretend I don't enjoy your company, Miss Zimmerman. You're different, she repeated, unsure if this was a compliment. You don't simper or play games, you speak your mind, you work harder than anyone I've seen. A smile touched his lips. And you make terrible biscuits. Theodora couldn't help but laugh. Her attempts at baking had indeed been disastrous, a fact that Maggie found endlessly amusing. My culinary skills leave much to be desired. My point is, Luke continued, serious again, people will talk regardless. But if my visits are causing you discomfort, I can make myself scarce. The thought sent a spike of panic through Theodora that surprised her with its intensity. Over these weeks, she'd come to rely not just on Luke's practical help but on his steady presence, his quiet encouragement when tasks seemed overwhelming. Your visits are not unwelcome, she said carefully. In fact, I've come to. She hesitated, searching for the right words. To value our friendship greatly. Something flickered in Luke's eyes, disappointment. Relief. She couldn't tell. As do I, Miss Zimmerman. As do I. That evening, after returning from town, Theodora found herself distracted as she tended the vegetable garden she'd started with Maggie's help. Her conversation with Luke kept replaying in her mind. What had she expected him to say? What had she wanted him to say? The sound of approaching hooves broke her reverie. She looked up, expecting to see Luke or perhaps Morris with her deliveries, but instead found 3 unfamiliar men riding into her yard. Something in their manner, the loose way they sat their horses, the calculating looks they cast around the property sent alarm bells ringing in her mind. She straightened, one hand still holding the garden hoe, which suddenly felt like a potential weapon. Afternoon, madam, the leader called, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. Hope we're not disturbing you. What can I do for you, gentlemen? Theodora kept her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. Just passing through, admiring the countryside, the man said, dismounting without invitation. The other 2 remained on their horses, watching. Nice little spread you've got here, fixing it up real nice. Thank you. It's a work in progress. The man nodded, wandering closer. He was tall and lean, with a scar running along his jaw and eyes that reminded Theodora of a snake, flat and cold. Couldn't help but notice you're out here all alone. Must be difficult for a lady. I manage, she replied, grip tightening on the hoe, and I have good neighbors close by. Ah yes, the sheriff, the man said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Heard he's been spending a lot of time out this way. Funny thing for a lawman to be so interested in one particular property. Theodora's unease deepened. Is there something specific I can help you with, Mr. Jackson? Tom Jackson. He glanced toward the cabin. Actually, we've been riding a long way, might trouble you for some water, maybe a bite to eat if you can spare it. Everything in Theodora screamed caution, but refusing hospitality to travelers was considered poor form in this country, even for single women. And if she angered these men, she was alone and vulnerable. "Of course," she said, gesturing toward the well. "Help yourselves to water. I'm afraid I don't have much food prepared, but you're welcome to some bread and preserves." Jackson smiled again, that same empty expression. "Mighty kind of you, madam. Boys, see to the horses while I help the lady." The two riders dismounted, leading their horses toward the water trough near the barn. Jackson fell into step beside Theodora as she headed for the cabin, coming uncomfortably close. "You know," he said conversationally, "a woman like you could do well for herself out here with the right kind of protection. Times can be dangerous." "I've found people in these parts to be generally honorable," Theodora replied, quickening her pace slightly. "And as I mentioned, Sheriff Farwell is a close neighbor," Jackson chuckled. "Sheriff's just one man, can't be everywhere at once. Why, anything could happen to a pretty lady all alone out here and no one would know until it was too late." The threat, thinly veiled as it was, made Theodora's blood run cold. They'd reached the cabin door now, and she paused, unwilling to let this man inside what had become her sanctuary. "I'll get the bread," she said firmly. "Please wait here." Jackson's hand shot out, gripping her arm just above the elbow. "Now, that's not very hospitable. I thought we might get better acquainted." Theodora's mind raced, calculating options. The cabin was too far from any neighbors for screaming to be effective. Luke had taught her to use the rifle he'd insisted she keep, but it was inside, propped by the door, just out of reach. A sudden commotion from the direction of the barn saved her from having to decide. Jackson's two companions were shouting, and horses were whinnying in distress. He released her arm, turning toward the noise. "What the hell are those fools doing now?" he muttered, stalking toward the barn. Theodora didn't waste the opportunity. She darted into the cabin, grabbed the rifle, and positioned herself on the porch, weapon at the ready. She might not be an expert shot, but at this distance, she wouldn't need to be. The scene at the barn clarified as Jackson reached it. Luke had arrived, apparently just in time to catch Jackson's men attempting to steal her horses. He had one man on the ground, the other backed against the barn wall, his hands raised. "This is a misunderstanding, Sheriff," Jackson called, slowing his approach. "We were just getting water for our horses, as the lady invited us to do." Luke's expression was cold as winter as he glanced from Jackson to where Theodora stood on the porch with the rifle. "That right, Miss Zimmerman. You invite these men to help themselves to your property?" "I offered them water and bread," she called back. "Nothing more." Luke nodded, his focus returning to Jackson. "You boys picked the wrong homestead to trouble. This is Zimmerman land under my protection, and your Jackson's gang wanted in 3 counties for theft and assault." Jackson's demeanor changed instantly, his false charm dropping away. "Now, Sheriff, let's not be hasty. We're just passing through looking for honest work." "The only work you'll find is breaking rocks at Huntsville Prison," Luke replied. "Now, all of you on your knees, hands where I can see them." For a tense moment, Theodora thought Jackson might resist. His hand twitched toward his holster and she raised the rifle higher, heart pounding. "I wouldn't," Luke advised conversationally. "Miss Zimmerman's become quite a good shot these past weeks, and if she misses, I won't." The fight seemed to drain from Jackson. He sank to his knees, his men following suit. Luke efficiently disarmed and bound them, all the while keeping a careful eye on Theodora, who maintained her position on the porch. Only when the 3 men were secured in a line did Luke approach the cabin. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Theodora nodded, lowering the rifle with hands that trembled only slightly. "Yes, thanks to your timely arrival." "Wasn't timing, was planning," Luke said grimly. "Been tracking these 3 since they crossed into the county 2 days ago, knew they were headed this way." He glanced back at the bound men. "Didn't expect them to be bold enough to try something in broad daylight, though. That's my fault. Should have warned you." "You can't anticipate every danger," Theodora said, though she was shaken by how quickly her sanctuary had been violated. Luke's expression softened. "Maybe not, but I can make sure this particular danger doesn't come back." He touched her arm gently, where a bruise was already forming from Jackson's grip. "He hurt you." It wasn't a question, and the quiet fury in his voice made Theodora shiver. "Nothing lasting," she assured him. "What happens now? Now I take these three to town and lock them up, then I'll be back." "That's not necessary, I'll be fine." Luke's gaze held hers, unwavering. "I'll be back," he repeated. "That's not negotiable, Thea." The use of her familiar name, which he'd never used before, silenced her objections. She nodded, watching as he efficiently loaded the three criminals onto their own horses and led them away, promising to return before dark. True to his word, Luke reappeared as the sun was setting, this time accompanied by both Maggie and a young ranch hand Theodora recognized from the Farwell property. "We're staying the night," Maggie announced without preamble, dismounting with a basket of food in hand. "No arguments. Luke and Jim will take turns keeping watch, and you and I will have a cozy evening indoors." Theodora knew better than to protest. The truth was, she was deeply relieved not to be alone, though she'd never have admitted it under normal circumstances. "Thank you," she said simply. "All of you." The evening passed more pleasantly than Theodora could have expected, given the circumstances. Maggie cooked a hearty meal and they ate together on the porch, watching as the last light faded from the sky. Jim took first watch, positioning himself near the barn with a shotgun across his knees. "Jackson and his boys will be facing trial next month," Luke informed them. "Judge Parker's coming through. He doesn't take kindly to men who threaten women." "Good," Maggie said firmly. "Hanging's too good for their kind." Theodora was surprised by the vehemence in the normally gentle woman's voice. "You've had trouble with them before." Maggie and Luke exchanged a look heavy with meaning. "Not Jackson specifically," Luke said carefully, "but men like him. Few years back, before I was sheriff, there was an incident at a neighboring ranch, young widow running it on her own. 3 men rode in, similar to today. He didn't continue, but he didn't need to." Theodora understood the implication, and it made her stomach turn. "What happened to her? She survived," Maggie said quietly. "But she sold the ranch and moved back east, never really recovered." "And the men," Luke's expression hardened. "2 died resisting arrest, 1 went to prison, should still be there if there's any justice." The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, but Theodora found herself watching Luke with new understanding. His protectiveness toward her wasn't just neighborly concern or even personal interest, it was informed by past tragedy, by a determination that history not repeat itself. Later, when Jim and Luke were discussing watch rotations and Maggie was preparing the cabin for the night, Theodora took a moment alone on the porch. The Texas night was clear and cool, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. Luke found her there, gazing upward. "Penny for your thoughts," he said softly, joining her at the porch railing. "I was thinking about belonging," she replied honestly. "About how a place becomes home," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And has this place begun to feel like home?" "It's starting to," she admitted. Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, the challenges, the work, even today's danger, they've all made me feel more connected to this land, not less. "That's the Texas way," Luke said with a small smile. "This country tests you, breaks you down sometimes, but if you persist, it rewards you. Becomes part of you. Like the people," Theodora added, meeting his gaze. "Challenging at first, but worth the effort to know." Something shifted in Luke's expression, a softening, a warming. "Some people are worth more effort than others." "Yes," she agreed quietly, "they are." They stood in companionable silence for a long moment, the night sounds of Texas creating a gentle backdrop to their thoughts. Finally, Luke spoke again, his voice low. "I meant what I said earlier. These men won't trouble you again." "I know," Theodora replied. "But they've made me realize something important." "What's that?" "That I have more to learn if I'm going to survive out here, not just about farming or ranching, but about defending what's mine." She turned to face him fully. "Will you teach me?" "Not just the basics you've shown me so far, but everything I need to know to truly thrive here." Luke studied her face in the starlight, his expression serious. It won't be easy. Some lessons are hard learned. I'm not afraid of hard work. No, he agreed with the ghost of a smile. You've proved that much already. He extended his hand, as formal as if proposing a business arrangement. All right, Thea Zimmerman, I'll teach you how to thrive in Texas, but on one condition. She took his hand, trying to ignore the warmth that spread from the contact. What condition? That you teach me something in return, about literature, history, the things you know that I don't. Theodora laughed softly, surprised and touched by the request. I think that's a fair exchange, Sheriff. His hand tightened slightly around hers. Luke, he corrected. If we're going to be spending that much time together, I think we can dispense with formalities. Luke, she repeated, liking the way his name felt on her lips. Maggie's voice calling from inside broke the moment, but something had changed between them, a promise made, an understanding reached. As Theodora prepared for sleep that night, Maggie taking the second bed they'd brought from the Farwell ranch, she found herself thinking not of the danger she'd faced, but of the future stretching before her, a future that, increasingly, she couldn't imagine without Luke Farwell in it. The weeks that followed transformed both Theodora and her homestead. Under Luke and Maggie's guidance, she tackled each challenge methodically. The barn roof was repaired, the cabin made weathertight, and the first crops planted in fields cleared of weeds and rocks. Buttercup provided milk daily, and Theodora mastered the art of making butter and simple cheese. Her hands grew calloused, her skin bronzed by the Texas sun, and her city dresses gave way to practical skirts and blouses more suited to farm work. But the most significant transformation was in her confidence. With each new skill mastered, riding, shooting, mending, planting, she stood taller. The townsfolk noticed the change, and their attitudes shifted from skepticism to cautious respect. Miss Zimmerman's turning that wreck of a farm into something decent, Theodora overheard one man remark to another outside the general store. Never thought Joe's girl would have the grit for it. She's got help, his companion replied with a meaningful look. Sheriff's out there regular as clockwork. Still takes work, help or not. Remember the Millers, had plenty of help when they first came, gave up after the first drought anyway. The exchange pleased Theodora more than any direct compliment could have. She was proving herself, not just to the community but to herself. True to their agreement, she and Luke exchanged knowledge. During his visits, he taught her practical skills: how to predict weather from cloud patterns, how to find water in drought conditions, how to handle difficult births when Buttercup's time came. In return, during quiet evenings on the porch, Theodora shared her love of literature and history, reading aloud from the small collection of books she'd brought from Philadelphia or discussing the great civilizations of the past. Never thought much about ancient Rome before, Luke admitted one evening as they watched the sunset from the newly repaired porch. Strange to think of those people living their lives, facing their own challenges, so many years ago. That's what fascinates me about history, Theodora replied, pleased by his engagement with the subject. The continuity of human experience across time. Their world was so different from ours, yet people then wanted the same basic things we do: security, purpose, connection. Connection, Luke repeated thoughtfully. That's what makes a community work, isn't it? Not just being in the same place, but truly connecting. Yes, exactly. Theodora smiled, warmed by his understanding. It's what I missed most when I first arrived here, that sense of belonging, of being known. Luke's gaze held hers, steady and warm in the golden light. And now, the question hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the simple words. Theodora felt her heart quicken, aware that her answer mattered more than it should for a casual conversation between neighbors. Now, she said softly, I'm beginning to feel connected, to this land, to the community. She hesitated, then added with deliberate honesty, to you. Something shifted in Luke's expression, a softening around his eyes, a slight parting of his lips. He leaned forward slightly, and for a breathless moment, Theodora thought he might kiss her. The moment shattered at the sound of approaching horses. Both of them straightened, turning toward the sound as Maggie and two ranch hands rode into view, driving a small herd of sheep before them. "Surprise!" Maggie called cheerfully, seemingly oblivious to the tension she'd interrupted. "We brought you a house-warming gift, or rather, a farm-warming gift." Theodora stood confused. "Sheep." "5 ewes and a ram," Luke explained, his voice carefully neutral though Theodora noticed a flush along his jawline. "Romney breed good for both wool and meat. Thought they'd do well on your south pasture." "The grass there is too rocky for crops, but perfect for grazing," Maggie added, dismounting. "And sheep are easier to manage than cattle when you're on your own." "I don't know what to say," Theodora said, genuinely moved. "This is too generous." "Not generous, practical," Luke corrected, though his eyes held a warmth that belied his businesslike tone. "We had more than we need, and they'll diversify your income. The wool alone will pay for their keep." "Still, I can't simply accept—" "Of course you can," Maggie interrupted. "Consider it an investment in our future neighbor." Besides, Luke insisted. Theodora glanced at Luke, who looked momentarily discomfited by his sister's candor. "Did he now?" "Maggie talks too much," he muttered, but there was no heat in it. "Yes, I thought you could use them." "Your father always planned to run sheep here." The mention of her father added another layer to Theodora's gratitude. The gift wasn't just practical assistance, it was help in fulfilling Joseph Zimmerman's dream for this land. "Thank you," she said simply. "Both of you. I'll make sure they thrive here." They spent the remainder of the day settling the sheep in the south pasture, erecting a temporary pen until proper fencing could be installed. Maggie and the ranch hands departed as evening approached, but Luke lingered, helping Theodora secure the animals for the night. "They seem content," Theodora observed as they watched the sheep grazing peacefully in the golden light of sunset. "They're adaptable," Luke replied. "Like you." Theodora smiled at the comparison. "I hope so. There's still so much I don't know. You've learned more in 2 months than most newcomers learn in a year." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "You're thriving here, Thea. Your father would be proud." The words touched her deeply, bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. "I hope so. I think of him every day working this land." Luke reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was light but sent a current through Theodora that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. "Earlier," he said quietly, before Maggie arrived, "we were talking about connection." Theodora's heart quickened. "Yes. What I wanted to say, what I should have said, is that I feel it too." His voice deepened. "This connection between us, it's not just neighborly, and we both know it." The directness was so typical of him, so refreshingly honest after the veiled conversations and social games of Philadelphia society. Theodora found she preferred it immensely. "No," she agreed, meeting his gaze steadily. "It's not just neighborly." Luke's hand cradled her cheek, his touch gentle despite the calluses earned from years of ranch work. "I care for you, Thea, more than I expected to, more than might be wise given how new you are to this life." "Are you concerned I'll leave?" she asked, understanding dawning. "That when winter comes or the crops fail or some new hardship arises, I'll run back east." "The thought has crossed my mind," he admitted. "This life isn't for everyone. I've seen people try and fail, people who thought they had the determination but didn't understand the sacrifices required." Theodora placed her hand over his where it rested against her face. "I'm not saying it will be easy, or that I won't have moments of doubt, but I've made my choice, Luke. This is my home now. I'm not running anywhere." Something in her words or the certainty with which she spoke them seemed to reach him. The caution in his eyes gave way to a warmth that made her breath catch. "In that case," he murmured, drawing her closer, "I believe I was about to do this." His lips met hers, gentle at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. Theodora had been kissed before chaste, proper kisses from well-bred Philadelphia gentlemen, but nothing like this. This was a kiss that spoke of sun-warmed earth and star-filled Texas nights, of challenges faced together and promises yet to be made. It was a kiss that felt, improbably, like coming home. When they finally parted, Luke rested his forehead against hers, his breathing as unsteady as her own. "I've been wanting to do that since the day you stood on your porch with that rifle, defending what's yours." Theodora laughed softly. "An unusual time to develop romantic feelings. Maybe, but it was the moment I knew for certain you belonged here." He brushed another light kiss across her lips. "With the land, with Texas, with you?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. His smile was slow and sure. "With me, if that's what you want." "It is," she said simply. "Though I warn you, I'm still terrible at making biscuits." Luke's laugh rumbled through him, vibrating against her where their bodies touched. "I can live with that. Maggie makes enough for all of us anyway." They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, the future spreading before them as vast and promising as the Texas horizon. Theodora knew there would be challenges ahead: drought, harsh winters, the never-ending work of taming the land, but for the first time since arriving, she faced those possibilities without fear. She had found her strength in this wild country, and in doing so, had found something else she hadn't expected: love. That night, after Luke had ridden home with a promise to return the next day, Theodora sat on her porch in the gathering darkness. She looked out over the land that was now truly hers, not just by deed, but by the sweat and determination she'd poured into it. The fields waited for harvest, the animals settled in their pens, and the cabin stood solid against the coming night. "I did it, Father," she whispered to the star-filled sky. "I'm making it work, and I think I'm finally home." The summer heat gave way to the crisp days of autumn, bringing with it the first harvest of Theodora's labor. The crops weren't bountiful by established farm standards, but for a first-year effort on reclaimed land, they were remarkable. Even Morris at the general store expressed surprise when she brought in her excess to sell. "Never seen corn this size from first-year fields," he admitted, examining the ears with expert hands. "Your father struggled for years to get half this quality." "Different methods," Theodora explained, not mentioning that those methods had come from Luke's careful guidance. "And perhaps a bit more patience." Morris nodded, calculating on his ledger. "I'll take all you've got at fair price, and Mrs. Peterson was asking if you'd have extra milk again this week. Says your butter's the best she's tasted since coming from Vermont." Theodora couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Her butter-making skills, once non-existent, had improved dramatically under Maggie's tutelage. "Tell her I'll have some ready tomorrow." As she left the store, packages tucked under her arm, Theodora nearly collided with Mrs. Reynolds, who was entering with her daughter. "Miss Zimmerman," the woman greeted her, more warmly than she would have months before. "I hear congratulations are in order." Theodora paused, confused. "Congratulations," Mrs. Reynolds raised her eyebrows. "On your engagement, of course." "To Sheriff Farwell." Heat rose in Theodora's cheeks. While her relationship with Luke had deepened steadily through the fall and they had discussed a future together, no formal engagement had been declared. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," she said carefully. "The sheriff and I are close, but we're not engaged." Mrs. Reynolds looked genuinely surprised. "Oh, my apologies. The way you two have been seen together, and with him building that addition to your cabin, we all assumed." "Addition," Theodora repeated, now thoroughly confused. Luke had mentioned no addition. "The new rooms on the east side," Mrs. Reynolds said, frowning. "Surely you know about that. My husband saw the lumber being delivered last week." Theodora maintained her composure through the remainder of the conversation, made her excuses, and headed directly for the sheriff's office. Luke was at his desk, reviewing wanted posters with his deputy when she entered. "Thea," he greeted her with a smile that faded slightly as he registered her expression. "Everything all right? Could I speak with you privately, Sheriff?" she asked, keeping her voice level. Luke nodded, recognizing the seriousness of her tone. He dismissed his deputy and closed the office door behind him. "What's happened?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I've just had an interesting conversation with Mrs. Reynolds," Theodora said, watching his reaction carefully. "She congratulated me on our engagement." Luke winced slightly. Town gossip, I'm sorry, I should have warned you that was circulating. That's not all. She also mentioned you're building an addition to my cabin, one I know nothing about. A flush crept up Luke's neck, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked distinctly uncomfortable. Ah, that. Yes, that. Theodora crossed her arms. Care to explain? Luke ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. It was meant to be a surprise. For your birthday next month. My birthday is in April. For Christmas, then, he amended, then sighed at her skeptical expression. All right, the truth is, I was planning to ask you to marry me once it was finished. Thought you might be more inclined to say yes if you saw I was serious about making a life together. The simple honesty of the admission melted Theodora's irritation. You're building rooms onto my cabin as a marriage proposal. Our cabin, he corrected gently, if you'll have me. I know it's not as romantic as poetry or flowers, but I thought it was practical. The place is too small for a family, and I figured you'd want to stay on your land rather than move to mine. A family, Theodora repeated softly. The word hung between them, full of promise. Luke moved closer, taking her hands in his. I love you, Thea, have for months now. Been trying to find the right way to tell you, the right time to ask you to be my wife. Guess the town beat me to it. Theodora felt a smile spreading across her face despite her earlier indignation. You love me. More than I thought possible, he admitted, his eyes never leaving hers. Didn't expect to find love at this stage of my life, especially not with a stubborn Easterner determined to tame the wildest patch of Texas single-handedly. I had help, she reminded him, squeezing his hands. Quite a lot of it, in fact. You had guidance, he corrected. The work, the determination, the spirit that was all you. You've thrived here because you chose to, because you've got the kind of strength this country respects. He paused, his expression growing serious. I'm not asking you to give up your independence, Thea. I know how hard you've worked for it. But I am asking if you might consider sharing your life with me, building something together that's greater than what either of us could create alone. Theodora felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from a happiness so intense it was almost painful. Luke Farwell, are you asking me to marry you? Here in your dusty sheriff's office with wanted posters as our witnesses, the corner of his mouth lifted in a smile. I am. Though I had planned something more dignified, with a proper ring and maybe even a clean shirt. And the answer is yes, she said simply. I would be honored to be your wife, though I do have one condition, name it, no more building on my property without telling me first. Luke laughed, pulling her into his arms. Deal, though technically once we're married it'll be our property, as will yours, she pointed out. Does this mean I get to start making unexpected additions to Farwell Ranch as well? Absolutely. Maggie would welcome the help. She's been after me for years to expand the main house. He brushed a gentle kiss across her lips. She's going to be ecstatic about this engagement, by the way, been dropping hints about it since July. Only July, Theodora teased. I believe Mrs. Peterson at the Mercantile had us married by June. Small towns, Luke said with a shake of his head. No secrets. No secrets, Theodora agreed, resting her head against his chest, but plenty of blessings if you know where to look. They were married on Christmas Eve in the small church in Austin, with Maggie as Theodora's bridesmaid and the deputy as Luke's best man. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, even those who had once doubted the Philadelphia lady would last a month in Texas. Never seen the sheriff look so happy, Morris remarked to his wife as the couple exchanged vows. Or so nervous. She's good for him, Mrs. Morris replied approvingly. Brought him out of that shell he's been in since his parents passed. And he's good for her too, taught her how to survive out here. More than survive, her husband corrected. Thrive. Did you taste that preserve she brought to the Harvest Festival? Best peach jam in the county, and those were from trees everyone thought were long dead. After the ceremony, the celebration moved to Farwell Ranch, where tables groaned with food contributed by neighbors and friends. Theodora, radiant in a simple ivory gown that Maggie had helped her make, moved among the guests with an ease that would have been unimaginable 6 months earlier. These were her people now, her community. The whispers that had followed her first arrival had transformed into genuine welcome. "You've done the impossible," Maggie told her as they shared a quiet moment amid the festivities. "You've turned my brother into a romantic. I nearly fainted when I saw what he was building onto your cabin. 3 rooms with real glass windows," Theodora laughed. "He's always been a romantic at heart, just needed the right incentive to show it." "And you're happy?" Maggie asked, her expression growing serious. "Truly happy with this life with Texas. It's not always easy, especially during the dry years." "I know," Theodora assured her. "I'm under no illusions about the challenges ahead, but yes, I'm happy. Happier than I ever was in Philadelphia with its rigid social rules and hollow conventions." She glanced across the room to where Luke was deep in conversation with several ranchers. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, his eyes finding hers with unerring accuracy. The smile they exchanged needed no words. "Well," Maggie said with satisfaction, "that answers that." As the celebration continued into the evening, Luke found Theodora standing on the porch, taking a moment of quiet beneath the winter stars. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "Not one," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Just contemplating how much has changed in less than a year. Last Christmas, I was nursing my father in Philadelphia with no idea what the future held. Now I'm here, a Texas farmer with a thriving homestead and a husband who believes in me more than anyone ever has." "Not just belief," Luke corrected gently. "Knowledge. I know what you're capable of because I've seen it with my own eyes. You came here a stranger, faced every challenge head-on and carved out a place for yourself. That's not something everyone can do." Theodora turned in his arms, facing him fully. "I couldn't have done it without you, without your guidance, your patience, your—" She hesitated, then smiled. "Your love, even before either of us recognized it for what it was." Luke's hand came up to cradle her face, his touch as gentle as it had been the first time they kissed. "We're a good team, you and I, different strengths, different backgrounds, but headed in the same direction." "Forward," Theodora agreed, "together." Their kiss was a promise, sealed beneath the vast Texas sky that had once seemed so foreign to her and now felt like home. Inside, their friends and neighbors celebrated, the warmth of community a buffer against the winter chill. Before them stretched a future they would build together, a future of hard work and rich rewards, of challenges met and joys shared. Nobody had believed Theodora Zimmerman could survive alone in the harsh Texas hill country. They had been right, in a way. But with Luke Farwell by her side, she hadn't merely survived, she had thrived, transforming not just the land but herself in the process. And in finding her own strength, she had found a love deeper and truer than anything she could have imagined. Spring brought new beginnings to the Farwell Zimmerman homestead. The addition to the cabin was completed a generous kitchen, a proper bedroom, and a small study filled with Theodora's books, making it a true home rather than just a shelter. The fields were planted with an expanded variety of crops. The sheep produced their first lambs under Theodora's watchful care, and Buttercup delivered a healthy heifer calf that promised to continue the small dairy herd. But the most significant new beginning arrived on a warm May morning, when Theodora gave birth to their first child, a son they named Joseph Luke Farwell, in honor of both his grandfather and his father. "He has your eyes," Theodora whispered as she cradled the infant, Luke sitting beside her on their bed. Maggie had assisted with the birth and now busied herself in the kitchen, giving the new family a moment alone. "And your determination," Luke replied, gently stroking the baby's dark hair. "Did you see how he came into this world? No hesitation, no fear, just like his mother." Theodora laughed softly. "I think you're attributing rather advanced qualities to a newborn, maybe." Luke kissed her forehead, "but I wouldn't be surprised, not with the heritage he carries." The following years brought more changes and more blessings. A daughter, Margaret Rose, joined their family 2 years later with her mother's auburn hair and her father's steady gaze. The homestead expanded, absorbing adjacent land when a neighboring farmer decided to move north. Luke continued his duties as sheriff, but gradually shifted more responsibility to his deputy. As the ranching and farming operations demanded more attention, Theodora, true to her teaching background, started a small school in their home during the winter months, when farm work slowed. What began as lessons for her own children soon expanded to include neighboring families, grateful for access to education without the long journey to Austin. "Never thought I'd see the day when the toughest rancher in the county would insist his boys learn poetry," Luke remarked one evening after a particularly successful school session. "You've worked a kind of magic here, Thea." "Not magic," she corrected, setting aside the essays she'd been reviewing. "Just recognition of a need. These children deserve the same opportunities for education that city children have. And who better to provide it than Philadelphia's finest?" he teased gently, pulling her into his arms. "Though I notice you've incorporated some distinctly Texan elements into your curriculum. Don't think Shakespeare included lessons on tracking or weather prediction. Education should be practical as well as intellectual," Theodora replied primly, though her eyes danced with humor. "Besides, I've learned as much from them as they have from me." It was true. The children brought their own knowledge to her classroom, traditional remedies passed down through generations, methods for predicting weather that had proven eerily accurate, stories of the land that predated white settlement. Theodora incorporated it all, creating an education uniquely suited to their lives on the frontier. News of her unconventional school spread, and by the 5th year of their marriage, the governor himself visited during a tour of the territory, curious about the Eastern schoolteacher who had not only adapted to frontier life, but had transformed education in their remote corner of Texas. "Mrs. Farwell," he said after observing her lessons, "you've accomplished something remarkable here. Have you considered formalizing your school? The state could provide funding, a proper building." Theodora considered the offer carefully. "I appreciate the recognition, Governor. But I believe part of our success comes from the intimate setting, the connection to the land and the community. A formal institution might lose some of that." The governor nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps, but consider this: your methods could be a model for other frontier communities. Would you at least document your approach? Allow us to share it with other educators." This she agreed to. And over the next winter, Theodora compiled her educational philosophy and practical techniques into a slim volume that eventually found its way to schools throughout Texas and beyond. Her name became known in educational circles, leading to correspondence with teachers and administrators across the country. "Never expected to be married to a famous author," Luke teased when the first printed copies of her book arrived. "Hardly famous," Theodora demurred, though she couldn't hide her pride in the accomplishment. "Just sharing what I've learned. This place has been my greatest teacher." "And you've been its greatest student," Luke replied, his voice soft with admiration. "Do you ever regret it? Coming here, taking on this life?" Theodora looked around at the home they'd built together, now expanded into a proper ranch house with wide porches and comfortable rooms. Through the window, she could see their children playing in the yard, healthy and strong, their faces alight with the joy of discovery. In the distance, the fields stretched green and promising, the orchards her father had planted now restored to full productivity under her care. "Not for a moment," she said with absolute certainty. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be." 10 years to the day after Theodora first arrived in Austin, the community gathered at Farwell Ranch for a celebration. What had begun as a simple anniversary party expanded into something more significant, a recognition of what one woman's determination had brought to their corner of Texas. "To Thea," Maggie proposed, raising her glass as friends and neighbors gathered around the long tables set up in the yard. "Who came to us a stranger and became the heart of our community." "To Luke," Theodora countered, who saw possibility where others saw only failure and who taught me not just to survive but to thrive. The couple exchanged a look filled with a decade's worth of shared experiences, hardships overcome, joys multiplied by sharing, a love that had only deepened with time and challenge. Later, as twilight softened the landscape and children chased fireflies across the yard, Theodora found herself standing in almost the same spot where she and Luke had first acknowledged their feelings for each other all those years ago. "Penny for your thoughts," Luke said, coming up beside her, the phrase a familiar echo from their early days. "I was thinking about that first summer," Theodora replied, leaning into his embrace. "How impossible everything seemed, the land, the work, the loneliness. You never showed it. Not once did I see you waver." "Oh, I wavered," she admitted with a soft laugh. "Many times, but never when anyone was watching." Luke pressed a kiss to her temple. "That's courage, Thea, not the absence of fear but the determination to move forward despite it." They stood in companionable silence, watching as their children, now 4 in total, with the additions of twins Samuel and Sarah 3 years earlier, played with their cousins and friends. The community they'd built together surrounded them, strong and vibrant as the Texas landscape itself. "You know," Luke said thoughtfully, "when you first arrived, nobody believed you'd last a month out here on your own." "I remember," Theodora replied dryly. "They weren't subtle about their doubts, and now look at you. Running a school, managing this land better than your father ever did, raising 4 children, writing books." Pride resonated in his voice. "You didn't just prove them wrong, Thea, you showed them a whole new way to see what's possible." Theodora turned in his arms, looking up at the face she'd come to know as well as her own, the lines etched by Texas sun and honest work, the blue eyes that still regarded her with the same warmth they had a decade ago. "We showed them," she corrected gently. "Together. That's the real lesson, isn't it? Not that I could survive alone, but that together we could build something extraordinary." Luke smiled, the expression transforming his weather-worn features. "Together," he agreed, sealing the word with a kiss as the Texas stars began to appear overhead, witnesses to a love that, like the land itself, had endured and flourished against all odds. And as night fell fully over the gathering, as neighbors departed with warm farewells and their children were tucked into bed, Theodora Zimmerman Farwell stood on the porch of the home she had created, her husband's arm around her waist, and gazed out at the land that had tested her, challenged her, and ultimately embraced her. She had come west with nothing but a deed to a neglected homestead and a determination born of necessity. She had faced skepticism, danger, and countless obstacles. But with Luke's guidance and her own indomitable spirit, she had not merely survived, she had thrived, creating a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The Texas night surrounded them, vast and beautiful, a fitting backdrop to the story they had written together, a story of love, perseverance, and the remarkable strength that can be found when one person believes in another enough to show them not just how to survive, but how to truly live.